Hello and welcome to another episode of Tips from the Top. My name is Rick Barron and I'm your host. If there's a leadership pyramid, today we're about to climb as close to the top as we've ever been. I am fortunate today to have with me Brad Wenstrup, a U.S. representative representing Ohio's 2nd Congressional District. Representative Wenstrup, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure to be with you. Thank you for putting this show on.
Would you please give our viewers a brief introduction of yourself and the role that you serve in Congress?
Sure. I currently serve as the representative for the 2nd District of Ohio in the U.S. House of Representatives, which covers 8 counties, 5 full counties and 3 partial counties. And so with that role, we have the responsibility, as you know, of representing the people in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, and the Intelligence Committee. We have to weigh in on just about every topic that comes our way in Washington, but we somewhat specialize in our committee work, of course.
My understanding is that that's one more committee than most people normally serve on. Is that true?
That is true. In my first session in Congress, I had the Armed Services and the VA piece, and then I added Intel this time. So it's a little bit more work, but that's where your staff comes in to keep things going for you as well. Mm-hmm. But it's an honor to be able to serve in those capacities.
How big is your team that you've got?
We have about 15 employees total in Washington, D.C. and here in the district with 3 offices in the district where our staff is present to be able to help people out with their constituent problems.
And how does that compare to other
It's about the same. You have a budget that you work with, and you spend it however you want. And if you go over that budget, it comes out of your pocket personally. You can't take it from campaign funds or anything like that. So you work within your budget. We like to return some money at the end of the term and give a little bit of the taxpayer dollars back to the Treasury.
That's always nice. Mm-hmm. What leadership skills have you found to be most helpful in your role?
Well, you know, it is a team effort, without a doubt. It's a team effort from the standpoint of working in Congress. In the House of Representatives, there are 435 members. Armed Services Committee, for example, has, I believe, 68 members. The VA Committee has about 15 members. So you're always part of a team, but you want to lead in your own right, and you want to lead within your staff. And you want to set the example, and you don't ask people to do things that you wouldn't do. And that comes from both my military experience and any job that I've held.
Lead by example.
Lead by example.
Yeah.
So.
I've had an opportunity to meet the sheriff in Claremont County,
mm-hmm.
and that is pretty much his theme, lead by example.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes a long way for people. If you're willing to do what you're asking others to do, it makes a big difference.
How then do you show that leadership? By example, 15 staff members across multiple offices and multiple locations. I don't imagine you get to see everybody every week.
No, sometimes you don't. We're in Washington. Usually it's 3 or 4 day work weeks, and then I'm home on weekend to be involved in the district. And we're usually in Washington about 3 weeks out of 4. But there's a lot of communication, especially today. You're texting, you're emailing, mm-hmm. you're on the phone, things like that. So you have a great opportunity to always communicate with your staff. And you have a chief of staff in Washington and a district director here. And so it all trickles down, and there's leadership roles for everybody. And everyone has their assignments. But like I said, for me, what it comes down to is there's typically right and wrong in almost everything you do. And my parents taught me that. And if that's the type of example that you lead with and you don't skimp, then that carries over to your staff.
Do you do the interviewing, or you got somebody else to do that?
Well, it's interesting because you sometimes don't always want to be the bad guy when it comes to hiring. Mm-hmm. But you do have the final say on things when you're doing your hiring. But the main thing that I was involved with was hiring my chief. And when you hire your chief of staff, I got someone with plenty of experience, had worked for a representative who retired and had the same values and goals that I did. And then after that, you pretty much leave it up to the chief to start to do the hiring for what they want and let them lead within the office. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, in almost every time, I always want to meet the new employee or get it, if the chief has it down to 2 people, then I get involved with the final process there, and then we make a decision together.
Really then painting the vision, finding somebody that aligns with that vision, and then giving them control to go manage that piece of the business, if you will, for you.
Right, carry out the mission. I mean, I think too, when you talk about leadership, there's always a time for any leader where you are also following. You know, you've been given a role, you go lead on it, but you're following what you were instructed to do or what you agree with to do. So you're always playing two roles no matter what, unless you're at the very top of that pinnacle or triangle you talked about. Then it's all you. And I think we know where we're talking about there. So.
Yeah. In your role, you have an opportunity to meet and work with a number of powerful and influential people.
Mm-hmm.
Is there somebody that really comes to mind as someone that you've worked with that really stands out?
As far as somebody I've worked with, you know, there's people, of course, that you see from a distance and know about and you admire and you respect their leadership. But for somebody that stands out that you've actually worked with, I can think of my deputy commander when I was in Iraq. I love his leadership style, the way he encouraged people to speak up and give information, the way he responded to people that had ideas. You know, rather than, oh, I don't like that idea, or I don't even want to hear it. It was always, let me hear what you have to say. And then give the counterpoints, have a discussion, and come to a conclusion, and maybe override. But usually, I will tell you, if I thought we disagreed on something, usually at the end I agreed because he made the case, but he did hear me out. Other than that, the best leaders I've had that I've worked with through my whole life are my mom and dad. And they showed me how it is to lead a family, and right and wrong, and a set of principles and character and morals.
Any mentors along the way, other than your parents?
Oh, certainly. You know, I mean, as a doctor and someone who trains in surgery, you have a lot of them. And so you're influenced by so many of your surroundings, by the people you grow up with, the teachers that you have, the school that you go to. For example, my high school, St. Xavier, the motto of the school was to be a man for others. Well, that carries over. That's a service-oriented role, and that's how you were mentored as a student in high school, and that carries over. What can I do to be part of something bigger and make something better and to serve others when you have the abilities and capabilities to do that? So, and then you get into your education and surgery, and you know, I thought, I was a great surgeon. That surgeon taught me a lot. You know, I remember one surgeon, for example, that said, anybody can do surgery when everything goes right. The good surgeons know what to do when it doesn't go right. Now, that's something that sticks with you and how you train yourself. And that's the same with military. You know, what are your contingency plans? You know, what are you going to do when everything isn't going exactly right? And do you have that in your mind? Have you already thought this through? And so those are things that come into play for leadership, so you don't suddenly go, oh, I didn't think about this happening. You know, and you're like, I knew this might happen, or I thought this might happen, and so here's what we're going to do. And those are things that were taught to me along the way.
You currently hold the rank of Lieutenant Colonel.
Yes.
In the Army Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like your military experience has been very important in shaping who you are. Mm-hmm. I mean, what does the military do really well in creating leaders?
Well, they teach you to actually lead, right? You're put in positions where people are expecting you to guide them. And so you can practice that, but in this case, you're actually doing that. And it's more than role-playing. You actually have that responsibility. The other thing is you learn to make decisions. Another thing that I've learned over time, too, I think when I first started in the military, for example, I thought, oh, I wonder if I'll ever meet a general. And you go to war and you find yourself engaged with generals all the time, and you know what? They get dressed the same way you do every day, and they're just human beings, and you realize that you have the opportunity and hopefully the God-given abilities and education and wherewithal to step into those roles yourself. But the military also teaches you right and wrong. I mean, let me just give you an example. We all have a set of codes that we live by, values that we adhere to. And so, for example, in the Army itself, there's an acronym that we use for leadership. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. Now, those are values that stick with you, and if you keep those things in mind when you're put in situations, it really helps you lead and make the right decisions that are on behalf of not just you, but everyone else. And that's the other thing about the military. It is a selfless service. And look at our military today. It's all volunteer. So everyone there says, I will be a part of this. And you have the opportunity to be part of something much bigger than yourself. And you also have the opportunity to start to have vision beyond just what you're doing today, but where will this lead us in 15, 20 years, things like that. So it has had a big impact. And that service itself is really what led me to running for Congress. I get that experience and think, I don't want to just waste what I've learned here. Is there something more I can do with it? And certainly taking that military experience and being on the Armed Services Committee, and as a veteran being on the VA Committee, and then parlaying that into serving on the Intelligence Committee, I think was a perfect fit. But it's my current role is really based on what I have done previously.
I see now the value that I guess many corporations see in hiring veterans, because the military teaches them principles that can be applied in any environment.
Oh,
I mean, what you just described doesn't apply only in combat.
Right.
It applies in life, as you said, right versus wrong, and the kinds of values and principles that you can take into a corporate environment that most employers would very much embrace.
You would hope so, and I think that would lead to the success of the corporation in many ways. Corporations have a mission. They might have an annual mission or something else like that, maybe even a longer-term vision, and you say, okay, how can I participate in that, and how do we serve the greater good for the corporation, just as we try to do for the country in the military?
As an advocate for your constituents, you often push back on things that you don't think are right or fair. At some point in time, it's about embracing the greater good. And every once in a while, some individuals pay the price. How do you make those kinds of trade-offs?
Well, they are difficult. It is about the greater good. I think you bring up a good point, and certainly politics to me is not as clear-cut as some other things I've been in, like as a physician. You know, here's what you have, here's what we do, and this is how we get you better. Well, there's a variety of opinions that come in on how we proceed forward. So it's your own thoughts and processes, but it also is listening to your constituents. So as you're making decisions on, do I push back on this? How am I fighting for this? A lot of it has to do with your personal experience, but then also, what are your constituents feeling? And that's what's important. So it always gets me when people say, oh, Congress is on vacation. Yeah, just because we're not in Washington, we're not on vacation. You know, we are out.
Doing your homework.
Yeah, you ask my wife if it's a vacation when I come home, right? No, it's the work that we should be doing. And what is that work? You are out listening. And I think that's one of the key components to anything is listen to the people that are in the trenches. You know, I can weigh in pretty much firsthand what it means to be a doctor, and what it means to be a soldier, what it means to run a business. But that doesn't mean that I can weigh in on everything without listening to people that are in those trenches and what's going on with them. So, you know, you listen to your Chamber of Commerce, you listen to business owners, small business owners, individuals that want to come to the office and talk to you about an issue that's important to them. This is how you gather your information. But that's one of the key components, I think, to leadership is listening. And when I talked about the soldier that I served with in Iraq, the deputy commander, he was great at listening. And then when he responded to you, he was addressing your issues and having a conversation. And you usually left feeling pretty good about it.
Any other personal values or principles that you use in defining who you are as a leader?
You know, I think that if you just do what's right, sooner or later good things happen. Another principle that I live with is out of everything that happens bad, there's an opportunity to do something good. I mean, we see that in our society all the time. We live in the most philanthropic nation in the world. People are always responding when something bad happens. When I served in Iraq, I remember a sergeant one day, she said to me, "Sir, how come you come in here with a smile almost every day with all this stuff that's going on around us?" I said, "Because I'm not going to let them beat me." You know, I'm not going to let them take me down with them. That would mean they won. And I always find that there's some way we can be better. You know, in the military, we do things called after-action reviews and lessons learned. That's important in everything, not just in military. And sometimes you go, we could have done that better. We could, and I mean that in Congress, and I mean that in any venture, whether it was my business or as a doctor, always looking to improve. And I think those are important things to embrace.
There's got to be a ton of demands on your time. Everybody wanting you to listen to them. How do you decide who to talk to, who to send a staff member to talk to? How do you work through those?
Well, there's obvious priorities. For example, when you are called to your committee hearings, you're called to your committee hearings. When you are called to the floor to vote, you're called to the floor to vote. Another thing that's important in scheduling time is time with my family, because no matter what you have going on, don't neglect your family. I mean, that's important. You got to have that inner peace. I'm fortunate, you know, my wife is on board with what we're doing. It's a sacrifice for her in many times. We have a 1-year-old, so
wow.
You know, she's doing a lot, but she understands that, but we make sure that we have time together. But when it comes to all of you do have staff, you always want to address your constituents. I think that is important, that you have the opportunity to be with your constituents when they come to Washington, D.C. and hear what their issues are. Of course, there's other groups that want to talk to you as well that are beyond your constituents, but may be pertinent to the committees that you're on and information that you may need. Staff does take up a lot of it. So we have staff that have the expertise in different areas. And so certain thing, a VA issue is in one person's lane. A healthcare issue is in someone else's. A Department of Defense is someone else's. Banking industry is someone else's. So, you know, they get involved. They become very much experts on this and then keep me informed and briefed if I don't attend the particular meeting that takes place. It is tough because you can be in a meeting in Washington, D.C. and the buzzer rings and you got to go vote. And you don't know when that's coming. It's when arguments are finished and things like that. But the priority sometimes becomes, what's the issue of the day? You know, is it something we're about to vote on in the next few weeks? And so you do want to prioritize that conversation a little bit more because it's something you're making a decision on very quickly.
If you're just joining me on Tips from the Top, I'm here with U.S. Representative Brad Wenstrup, and we are talking about leadership. What I got from your description was that there are things that only you can do, and you know what those are. So those obviously are only things that you can do. And then in other cases, what you've done is you've created specializations for others on your team, so that they can then go do the deep dive that you're not capable of doing. Come back, brief you with the listening skills that you've got to be able to get what you need, and then to facilitate what they're trying to get out of spending time and working with you.
And I think one of the best times I have in this job is when I am sitting with my staff, with my chief and the expert on a certain subject, and we are sitting around discussing it, going through pros and cons, looking for unintended consequences of an action, things like that. Those are some of the best discussions, very fulfilling. And then you reach a conclusion and decide which way you're going to stand on something. The other thing, it's very heartwarming too, because when you have the opportunity to meet with people that are actually living with a disease, or who's got a family member that has a problem with the VA or something like that. You get those stories. That influences your guidance. And you also start to know, okay, this is something that we have to change. And we can only do that through legislation. So I'm willing to lead on that. But you start to learn that the interaction with the people that you represent and serve is huge.
In Congress, they're the ones that kind of collectively paint that vision of where our country's going. I think we give too much credit to the president because in many cases it's really the laws that dictate.
Should be.
Right, where you know, who we are, what we believe in. What is your view of where the United States will be in 20 years, and how can we and the viewers participate in making that happen?
Well, I can tell you where I would like to see our country being in 20 years, and it's It's interesting you pick that 20-year mark. When I was running for office, it was a quote that got in the paper. You know, sometimes you forget what you say till it shows up in the paper. But what I had said is, well, I hope that I take things and I look at what the effect they will have in 20 years. You know, sometimes we're looking for that moment or for the next 2 months, but really in the big picture, sometimes we need to do quick fixes, but overall we should be looking at how things are in 20 years. I look at America as a country that has led really since World War II. We have been a leader in the world, an experiment of freedom, supposedly, and I don't think it's an experiment anymore. I think freedom works pretty much every time, and we've proven that. And I want to continue in that direction, and we need to lead. And others in the world, I can tell you from this job and from my military experience, they look to us to lead. They depend on us to lead, you know, whether that was divine intervention, what God intended, or whatever, but I think that they do. And I think that we do have to maintain a sense of leadership, a moral high ground, and continue to lead in that direction. The other thing that I would like us to lead on, and starting within our own country over the next 20 years, is poverty. You know, if you look at the last couple elections, you rarely heard presidential candidates talking about poverty. A lot about the middle class. But let's embrace those in poverty and make sure that it's an opportunity not just to exist in that state, but to get out of that state. And I think that we can do it. I think America is ready to really embrace that. I'm just seeing that more and more. But as far as the leadership role around the world, it's because we have been so blessed. And freedom is a valuable thing, but with it comes responsibility, and Americans need to recognize this. And over the next 20 years, I hope that's a message that we continue to preach. And I think Pope John Paul II said it very well when he came to the United States talking about freedom. He was in St. Louis, and he says, freedom consists not in doing what we will, but rather having the right to do what we ought. So we have a lot of freedoms, which allows us to do things that maybe aren't the best thing to do, but it gives us the right to do what we ought to do. And I think that's a very important message, and a message that our country should carry out. Because you want those freedoms, you want those liberties, but at the same time you have a responsibility to do what you should be doing. And that, I think, can go a long way for our country.
It gets back to the lesson that you learned from your parents about right and wrong.
Exactly.
The lesson that you learned in the military about right and wrong. And what I heard you say was having the courage now to actually do what's right.
And inspire others to take that same mentality. That, you know, me personally, we're just passing through here. You know, none of us are getting out of here alive, right?
Right.
And so we're just passing through. So why not do everything you can to be part of something good and be part of something that leaves it better for the next generation? You know, I often talk about that, and this pertains to leadership, in my opinion. I look at things around Washington, D.C., the monuments, the Library of Congress, and we have all these things that remind us of what people did before us. For us, that we're never going to know us. You know, you can see the Emancipation Proclamation, the Declaration of Independence. You can see the World War II Memorial, where so many people gave their lives for the sake of the world and the next generation and for freedom. Always have to ask ourselves, is what we are doing here today something that the next generation is going to say thank you for? That's a good test. That's a good test.
Or the other side, are we honoring the sacrifice that so many made?
Exactly. I love the movie Saving Private Ryan for that testimony in and of itself, when he says, earn this, earn this. And what is the most moving parts of the movie is the elderly Private Ryan saying to his wife, tell me I've led a good life, tell me I've been a good man, because someone did this for me. Someone allowed me to be here and have this life. And I think we need to approach things in that way. And address those with greatest need, but also address the future and thank those that came before us.
In 2009, you made a bid for the mayor of Cincinnati.
Right.
And didn't make it.
Right.
What role does failure play in helping leaders?
I never considered it a failure, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I might have considered it a failure if I didn't try. that might have been the failure to me. And I have to tell you, I was not seeking this. It came to me. Someone said, you ever think about running for mayor? And I said, no. And here's where they got me. They said, how many people do you think get asked to run for mayor of a major city in the United States? And then I started thinking about that, and I thought, probably not too many.
Not too many.
And I thought, I'm going to meet a lot of people. I'll see what this system's like. And I came away, I thought it was a very positive experience, to be honest with you. It was interesting because they also said, well, if you get 35%, you're doing great in this city with the dynamics of party and this and that. And we got 46. And at 10:30 at night, I was still up by 2 points. And I thought, well, I'm glad I wrote 2 endings to this speech I'm about to give, because I don't know how this is going to play out. But along the way, I met a lot of good people. And it was a clean race. As a matter of fact, a few months after the election, Mark Mallory called my office and asked for my resume. And after getting it, I'd like to meet with you. And he said, we have an opening on the Board of Health. I heard what you had to say about the health of our citizens during the campaign, and I think you would be a good addition to the board. Would you take that? So that was a great experience. And let me tell you, that experience has helped me in Washington. To be part of public health and see how it operates has been a key component to some of the work that we do in Washington. So I try to look at the positive, and I think that did come out as a positive, and I met a lot of good citizens along the way. So.
You've been an entrepreneur for almost 30 years by my count.
Right.
Did you start in private practice or work for somebody else?
I started in private practice, and that's a little bit scary for anybody thinking about doing that. I can remember getting a loan for my practice and saying to the people at the bank, I said, this is what people do, right? Because I knew I was in debt for my student loans. I was prepared for that. But this was another debt that I was taking on. And it's a little bit intimidating in your late 20s to take this on. You know, my suggestion to a lot of people today is, do your homework when you're thinking of any kind of a business. Is it something that's sustainable? Is it going to be long term? Same with if you're deciding what you're going to major in college. I think today with the economy, think about what the long-term benefit is of having a certain degree and do your homework. So for example, for me, I knew at a young age I wanted to be a doctor, but around my senior year of college, I read this article that said by 1990, there will be an excess of all physicians except podiatrists. And I thought, well, let me check that out. I knew a podiatrist, spent time with them, liked what they were doing. At the time I was working in an emergency room in podiatry practice. Most people were leaving his practice saying, thanks, I feel a lot better, I'm doing better. So there's a pretty high success rate of helping people. And seeing that there would be a shortage, I thought, I'm going to check that out, and that's the way I went. Now, whether those numbers panned out 10 years later, I don't know, but I had a busy practice, so apparently there was a need. And I was very glad to do it. So I think checking out and seeing what the future is for you, do it. Understand what it means to borrow money to get yourself started and have a plan in place on how you're going to pay it back. And that's what we did.
Representative Wenstrup, we've got less than a minute left.
Okay.
Are there some resources that you can share with our viewers that they may be able to take advantage of through your office?
Well, sure, absolutely through office. The constituent service is probably one of the most rewarding things we get to do in our office, helping people if they're having problems with a passport, problems with any government agency. We can get you in the right direction and in many cases stand up for you and help you. If you're coming to Washington, D.C., call our office. We'll help you get set up with a tour. We can always do a Capitol tour without much difficulty. Sometimes a White House tour is a little bit more difficult, but we try to do that and help you with your way around Washington. But constituent service on government agencies is always something that we're willing to participate in and hopefully help you out.
Thank you, Representative Wenstrup.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to have you on Tips from the Top.